Victoria Hamilton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse apartment, gazing out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. In her perfectly manicured hand, she held a letter that threatened to shatter everything she'd been raised to believe. The prestigious law school acceptance she'd worked so hard for. Or rather, the acceptance her father had orchestrated lay heavy in her grip. "Darling, this is everything we've worked for." Richard Hamilton's voice echoed in her mind from their conversation earlier that evening. Her father, CEO of Hamilton Industries, had already planned out her entire future: law school, followed by a position at a top firm, then eventually taking over the family business. It was the path she'd been groomed for since childhood. But something felt terribly wrong. Victoria's reflection stared back at her from the window. Designer outfit, perfect makeup, not a hair out of place. The image of success and privilege. Yet beneath that polished exterior, an emptiness gnawed at her. She thought back to the moment earlier that day that had cracked her carefully constructed world. She had been visiting her mother's charitable foundation, fulfilling her obligatory board member duties, when she stumbled upon something unexpected. In the small classroom tucked away in the building's basement, she found Miss Chen, a kindergarten teacher, surrounded by a group of children from underprivileged families. The joy in that modest room was palpable. Genuine laughter, curious minds engaging with stories and art, tiny faces lighting up with understanding. For the first time in years, Victoria felt something stir inside her. The children's uninhibited enthusiasm, Miss Chen's patient guidance. It was raw and real, in a way her world of corporate meetings and society functions never was. She found herself lingering in the doorway, transfixed by the scene before her. "Would you like to join us?" Miss Chen had asked, noticing Victoria's presence. Her warm smile held no judgment, no awareness of Victoria's status. The children looked up expectantly, their faces open and welcoming. Victoria had declined, retreating to the safety of her scheduled meetings, but the memory haunted her. Now standing in her luxurious apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd glimpsed something authentic, something meaningful. Her phone buzzed insistently, another message from her father about the law school acceptance. Victoria's hand trembled as she set down the letter, the weight of expectations pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She thought of her mother, gone now for 5 years, who had always encouraged her to follow her heart. Sometimes the hardest paths are the ones most worth taking, her mother used to say. Victoria had never understood what she meant until now. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Marcus, her father's assistant, with more documents requiring her signature for the foundation. Victoria invited him in, noticing how he surveyed the apartment with barely concealed awe. She remembered hearing that he'd grown up in one of the neighborhoods served by her mother's foundation. "Miss Hamilton," Marcus began, his professional demeanor firmly in place. "These require your immediate attention. Also, your father wanted me to remind you about tomorrow's board meeting. He expects you to present the quarterly projections for the foundation's expansion." Victoria accepted the documents mechanically, but her mind was elsewhere. "Marcus," she found herself asking, "do you ever wonder if you're on the right path?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, his carefully maintained professional facade cracked, revealing something more genuine underneath. I believe we all question our choices sometimes, Miss Hamilton. But how do you know?" Victoria pressed, surprising herself with her intensity. "How do you know if you're living the life you're meant to live, or just the life others expect of you?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her with newfound interest. Finally, he spoke softly. "Perhaps the fact that you're asking these questions is an answer in itself." His words hit her with unexpected force. Victoria turned back to the window, her reflection now blurred by unshed tears. Behind her, Marcus quietly excused himself, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The night stretched on as Victoria paced her apartment, her mind racing. The memory of those children's faces, of Miss Chen's gentle guidance, kept returning. She thought about the foundation's mission, her mother's legacy, and how it had become just another business obligation rather than the force for good it was meant to be. Around midnight, she found herself pulling up the foundation's files on her laptop. She began reading about their educational programs, about the communities they served. Her eyes lingered on a section about their teaching initiatives. Something began to take shape in her mind, a possibility that both terrified and excited her. The sun was rising over Manhattan when Victoria finally made her decision. She picked up her phone and, with trembling fingers, dialed Miss Chen's number, which she'd gotten from the Foundation's directory. "Miss Chen, this is Victoria Hamilton. I apologize for calling so early, but I was wondering if I could come observe your class again. There's something I need to understand." As she ended the call, Victoria caught her reflection once more in the window. For the first time in years, she saw something different in her eyes, a spark of purpose, of possibility. The path ahead was unclear, but she knew one thing with certainty. Her life was about to change dramatically. What she didn't know was that this decision would not only transform her own life, but would also impact the lives of countless others, including one particular coworker who would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the Foundation's building dressed differently than usual. Gone were the designer suits and stilettos, replaced by a simple blouse and comfortable pants. She'd even removed most of her jewelry, leaving only her mother's delicate silver necklace. As she descended to the basement classroom, her heart pounded with an unfamiliar mixture of anxiety and excitement. Miss Chen's classroom was already alive with activity. 20 young children, aged 4 to 6, were engaged in various learning stations around the room. Some were building with blocks, others were painting, and a small group sat on a worn carpet, attempting to sound out words from picture books. The controlled chaos was so different from the sterile boardrooms Victoria was used to. "Welcome, Miss Hamilton," Miss Chen greeted her warmly. "Children, we have a special guest today. This is Miss Victoria, and she'd like to learn about our classroom." A chorus of "Hi, Miss Victoria" filled the room, accompanied by curious stares and shy waves. Victoria felt her carefully constructed poise beginning to crack under their genuine enthusiasm. "Actually," she found herself saying, "I was hoping I could do more than observe. Could I help?" Miss Chen's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Of course. Sarah needs a reading partner, don't you, Sarah?" A small girl with unruly curls and worn clothes looked up from her picture book, nodding eagerly. Victoria made her way to the reading corner, carefully settling onto the carpet beside Sarah. As she helped the child sound out words, something inside her began to shift. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Victoria found herself completely absorbed in the children's world, tying shoelaces, mediating sharing disputes, celebrating small victories when a child finally recognized a difficult word. She barely noticed when the classroom door opened, admitting a young woman carrying a stack of art supplies. "Sorry I'm late, Miss Chen. The supply store was packed, and then the subway." The woman stopped short upon seeing Victoria. "Oh, I didn't realize we had company." "Ah, Lucy, perfect timing," Miss Chen said. "This is Victoria Hamilton. She's helping us today." "Victoria, this is Lucy Martinez, our teaching assistant. She's studying for her teaching certification while working here." Lucy's expression shifted slightly at Victoria's name. Recognition and something else, wariness perhaps, flickering across her face. Victoria knew that look. She'd seen it countless times when people realized who she was, who her father was. "Hamilton, as in Hamilton Foundation." Lucy's voice was carefully neutral, but Victoria could hear the unspoken questions. "Yes, but I'm just here to learn," Victoria replied, surprising herself with her defensiveness. "The children they're amazing." Lucy's expression softened slightly, though her guard remained up. "They are. That's why we fight so hard for them, even with limited resources." The emphasis on limited resources wasn't lost on Victoria. She knew the Foundation's education budget had been cut in recent years, deemed less profitable than other initiatives. She'd signed off on those cuts herself, seeing them only as numbers on a spreadsheet. Now, looking around the room at the worn carpet, the second-hand books, and the basic art supplies Lucy had just brought in, those decisions took on a new, uncomfortable weight. The rest of the day was eye-opening in ways Victoria hadn't expected. She watched Lucy work tirelessly, moving from child to child, with seemingly endless patience and enthusiasm. Despite the obvious limitations of their resources, Lucy created magical moments of learning and discovery. She turned simple art supplies into science experiments, used storytelling to teach math concepts, and somehow managed to make each child feel special and valued. During lunch break, Victoria found herself sitting alone in the staff room, her designer lunch bag untouched as she processed everything she'd seen. Lucy entered, carrying a worn brown paper bag, and after a moment's hesitation, sat at the same table. "Why are you really here?" Lucy asked directly, her dark eyes searching Victoria's face. "Is this some kind of PR stunt for the foundation?" Victoria flinched at the accusation, but she couldn't deny its fairness. "No," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I'm here because I think I've been living someone else's life, making decisions based on someone else's values. Yesterday, I saw something real in this classroom, something meaningful. I need to understand it better." Lucy studied her for a long moment, unwrapping her simple sandwich. "Understanding is good," she finally said, "but these kids aren't here for your journey of self-discovery. They need real commitment, real support." "I know," Victoria replied quietly. "That's why I'm here. I want to learn how to give them that." Lucy's expression remained skeptical, but something in Victoria's tone must have reached her. "Well," she said, pulling out half of her sandwich and offering it to Victoria, "you can start by having a real lunch. That fancy salad isn't going to give you the energy you need for afternoon art time." Victoria looked at her untouched lunch, then at Lucy's offering. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the half sandwich. As they ate in companionable silence, Victoria felt another small shift in her world. The afternoon brought new challenges. A young boy had a meltdown over a broken crayon. Another child struggled with separation anxiety when her mother was late for pickup. And the art project turned messier than anticipated. Victoria found herself with paint in her hair and glitter on her clothes. But strangely, she didn't mind. What struck her most was watching Lucy handle each situation with grace and skill. She knew exactly what to say to calm the crying child, how to redirect frustrated energy into productive activities, when to be firm and when to be gentle. It was a different kind of expertise than Victoria was used to seeing celebrated, but it was expertise nonetheless. As the day wound down and the last child was picked up, Victoria helped Lucy clean up the classroom. They worked in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, less tense, more thoughtful. "You did okay today," Lucy finally said, straightening a stack of construction paper. "The kids liked you." "They're incredible," Victoria replied. "And you, the way you work with them is amazing. How did you know this was what you wanted to do?" Lucy paused in her cleaning, a distant look crossing her face. "I grew up in a neighborhood like theirs. Had a teacher who believed in me, showed me I could be more than my circumstances. I wanted to be that person for other kids." She looked directly at Victoria. "What about you? What do you want?" The question hit Victoria hard. No one had asked her that in years, not what she was expected to want, but what she truly desired. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. Her father's name flashed on the screen, along with multiple missed calls and messages. Reality crashed back in. The board meeting she'd missed. The law school acceptance still sitting on her penthouse counter. The life that was planned out for her, waiting to reclaim her. I have to go," she said, gathering her things quickly. "Thank you for today, both of you," she added, nodding to Miss Chen, who had been quietly observing from her desk. As Victoria hurried toward the door, Lucy's voice stopped her. "Will you be back tomorrow?" Victoria turned, seeing something like hope in Lucy's eyes, mixed with challenge. The answer should have been simple. No, of course not. She had responsibilities, expectations, a different life waiting for her. But looking at the classroom, at Lucy's questioning face, at Miss Chen's gentle smile, she found herself saying, "Yes, yes, I'd like that." As she rode the elevator up to street level, Victoria's phone buzzed again. Her father's messages grew increasingly urgent, demanding to know where she was, why she'd missed the board meeting, when she would call him back. But for the first time in her life, Victoria didn't immediately respond. Instead, she found herself thinking about Lucy's question. What did she want? The answer was starting to take shape, and it terrified her. The confrontation Victoria had been dreading arrived 3 weeks into her secret apprenticeship at Miss Chen's classroom. She'd managed to juggle her foundation duties and her time in the classroom, making excuses about working from home and delegating more responsibilities to Marcus. But as she helped Lucy clean up after a particularly successful science experiment involving growing plants, her father's voice boomed from the doorway. "So this is where my daughter has been hiding." Victoria froze, her hands still covered in potting soil. Richard Hamilton filled the classroom doorway in his impeccable suit, his presence somehow making the room feel smaller. Lucy straightened beside her, instinctively stepping slightly in front of Victoria, in a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "Father, I can explain," Victoria began, but Richard cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Marcus finally broke down and told me where you've been spending your time," he said, his voice controlled but vibrating with anger. "Though I must say, I had to see it for myself to believe it. My daughter, heir to Hamilton Industries, playing in the dirt with..." His eyes swept dismissively over Lucy and the classroom. "Children." "Mr. Hamilton," Lucy stepped forward, her chin raised. "Your daughter has been doing important work here. She has a natural gift for teaching." Richard's cold gaze fixed on Lucy. "And you are?" "Lucy Martinez. I'm a teaching assistant here." "Ah, yes, the scholarship recipient." Richard's tone made the words sound like an accusation. "I remember your application to the foundation. Very compelling story. But I don't recall it including permission to encourage my daughter to throw away her future." "Father." "Stop," Victoria interjected, finding her voice. She moved to stand beside Lucy. "No one is encouraging me to do anything. I chose to be here. These past weeks have shown me what real impact looks like, what it means to truly make a difference in children's lives." "Real impact?" Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Victoria, we employ thousands of people. Our foundation supports dozens of programs. That's real impact. This," he gestured around the modest classroom, "this is playing pretend. It's time to grow up and face your responsibilities." The words stung, but Victoria stood her ground. "The only thing I'm facing is the truth. Do you know we cut the education budget by 30% last year? These children are working with second-hand books and borrowed supplies while we spend millions on corporate galas and PR campaigns. Those galas and campaigns fund everything we do," Richard snapped, "including this little project. Your mother may have had her sentimental attachments to these programs, but business is business." At the mention of her mother, Victoria felt something snap inside her. Mom believed in making real change, not just writing checks and posing for photos. She would be ashamed of what we've turned her foundation into. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face hardened, and Victoria knew she'd crossed a line. But before he could respond, Lucy spoke up. "Your wife," she said quietly but firmly, "created this program because she believed every child deserved a chance to learn, to grow, to dream bigger than their circumstances. Victoria understands that. She's not just playing pretend. She's continuing your wife's legacy in the most meaningful way possible." Richard turned his cold gaze on Lucy. "You presume to know my wife's intentions?" "I know what this program meant to her," Lucy replied, holding his gaze. "I was one of the first children to go through it. Your wife used to visit our class, sit with us, read to us. She didn't just write checks, she showed up. She cared. And now your daughter is doing the same thing." Victoria stared at Lucy in surprise. She'd never known this part of Lucy's history with the foundation. Something in her father's expression flickered, a brief crack in his armor, before his face hardened again. "Victoria," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument, "you have responsibilities. The law school orientation is in 2 weeks. This ends now." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Miss Martinez, remember who funds your position before you encourage any more of my daughter's distractions." After he left, the classroom felt eerily quiet. Victoria's hands were shaking as she looked at Lucy. "You never told me you were in the program." Lucy's eyes were still fixed on the doorway where Richard had stood. "Your mother used to bring books for us, real books, not just second-hand ones. She'd sit on that same reading carpet, looking just as elegant as you did on your first day, and she'd do all the character voices." She turned to Victoria, her eyes soft with memory. "She's the reason I wanted to become a teacher." Victoria felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I barely remember her work here. I was so focused on becoming what my father wanted." "You're more like her than you know," Lucy said softly. She reached out and squeezed Victoria's hand, leaving a small smudge of potting soil. "But now you have a choice to make." Victoria looked down at their joined hands. Lucy's strong and capable, marked by her work with the children, and her own, still manicured despite weeks of classroom work. 2 worlds, 2 paths. "I can't abandon them," Victoria whispered. "The children, the program, you." Lucy's hand tightened on hers. "Then don't." That evening, Victoria sat in her penthouse, surrounded by law school materials and foundation documents. Her father's words echoed in her head, warring with memories of the past weeks. Sarah finally reading a complete sentence on her own. Michael overcoming his fear of speaking in front of the class. Lucy's proud smile when Victoria successfully led her first lesson. Her phone lit up with a text from Lucy. "Whatever you decide, know that you've already made a difference here." Victoria picked up her mother's photograph from her desk, studying the warm smile she remembered so well. "What would you do, Mom?" she whispered. The answer came to her slowly, then all at once. She reached for her phone and dialed Marcus's number. "Miss Hamilton," he answered, sounding worried. "Your father was quite upset today." "Marcus," Victoria interrupted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I need you to help me with something that might change everything." "What exactly are you planning?" Marcus asked cautiously. Victoria took a deep breath, looking out at the city lights. "I'm going to rebuild my mother's legacy, not my father's way, my way. And I'm going to need allies who understand both worlds." There was a long pause before Marcus replied, "Tell me what you need." As Victoria outlined her plan, she felt a certainty she'd never known before. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in her life, she was choosing it for herself. She thought of Lucy's words about her mother, about making a difference, about choosing. Sometimes the hardest paths are the ones most worth taking. She had no idea that her decision that night would set in motion events that would not only transform the foundation, but would also lead to an unexpected partnership that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, purpose, and the true meaning of success. Victoria's plan unfolded over the next 2 weeks with precision that would have made her father proud, though its nature would have horrified him. She spent her days in the classroom with Lucy and her evenings working with Marcus, meticulously building her case and gathering allies. Her law school orientation came and went without her presence, a fact that prompted multiple scathing messages from her father, all of which went unanswered. The Foundation's quarterly board meeting approached, and Victoria prepared for the battle of her life. The morning of the meeting, she arrived early at the classroom. Needing to center herself in the place that had changed everything, she found Lucy already there, arranging materials for the day's lessons. "You don't have to be here this morning," Lucy said softly, noting Victoria's formal attire. "The board meeting. I needed to see this first," Victoria replied, running her hand along a child's artwork displayed on the wall. "To remind myself what I'm fighting for." Lucy approached her, adjusting Victoria's slightly crooked necklace, her mother's necklace, with gentle hands. You're ready for this. You know that, right? Their eyes met, and Victoria felt that increasingly familiar flutter in her chest. Over the past weeks, something had been growing between them, something neither had dared to name. Every shared laugh, every brush of hands while helping a child, every late evening spent planning together had deepened their connection. "What if I fail?" Victoria whispered, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "What if I can't protect the program?" Lucy's hands moved from the necklace to cup Victoria's face, a bold gesture that caught them both by surprise. "Then we'll find another way, together. But you won't fail. You're not just fighting for the program anymore. You're fighting for yourself, for who you really are." The moment was interrupted by Marcus clearing his throat from the doorway. "Miss Hamilton, the board members are arriving." Victoria straightened, drawing strength from Lucy's unwavering faith. "Thank you, Marcus. Is everything ready?" He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Just as you planned. And there's someone else here to see you." Victoria followed Marcus to the Foundation's main conference room, her heart nearly stopping when she saw who waited inside. Miss Chen stood there, but she wasn't alone. Around her were dozens of former students from the program, now adults, professionals, parents themselves. Among them, Victoria recognized doctors, teachers, business owners, all products of her mother's vision. "We came to support you," Miss Chen said simply. "Your mother believed in all of us. Now we believe in you." Victoria felt tears threatening, but forced them back. She had work to do. As the board members filed in, including her father, she saw their surprised reactions to the assembled group. Richard Hamilton's face darkened as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Victoria," he began, his voice stern, "this is a closed board meeting. These people need to leave." "Actually, Father," Victoria said, her voice clear and strong, "they are crucial to today's presentation. You see, I'm proposing a complete restructuring of the Foundation's educational initiatives." She nodded to Marcus, who distributed detailed folders to each board member. "Inside, you'll find data on the long-term impact of our education programs, including testimonials from successful graduates, many of whom are here today. You'll also find a comprehensive plan to not only restore, but expand our educational funding." "This is absurd," Richard interrupted. "We've already allocated those funds to corporate partnerships that generate more press than impact," Victoria finished. "I've analyzed every program, every budget line. The numbers don't lie, Father. Our most successful initiatives, the ones creating real, measurable change in people's lives, are the ones my mother started, the ones we've been systematically underfunding." She moved to the front of the room, clicking through a presentation that showed the stark reality of their current spending versus impact. "We're not just a corporate PR machine. We're supposed to be changing lives. Like Dr. Sarah Chen here," she gestured to a young woman in the crowd, "who went from our early education program to medical school and now runs a clinic in the same neighborhood where she grew up." One by one, Victoria introduced the success stories standing in the room. Each person spoke briefly about how the program had changed their life, how Victoria's mother had given them opportunities they never thought possible. "This is all very touching," Richard said, his voice cold, "but sentiment doesn't fund programs. The corporate partnerships you're so quick to dismiss provide the majority of our funding." "That's why I've developed this," Victoria replied, turning to the final part of her presentation. "A new funding model that combines corporate social responsibility with direct community investment. We can maintain our corporate partnerships while redirecting funds more effectively." She laid out her plan, watching as board members began nodding along. She'd done her homework, speaking their language of profits and public relations, while never losing sight of the real mission. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Miss Chen stepped forward. "I've watched Victoria these past weeks. She has her mother's heart and her father's business sense. But more importantly, she has her own vision. If anyone can bridge these two worlds, it's her." Richard Hamilton sat rigid in his chair, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. You missed your law school orientation for this. I'm not going to law school, Father, Victoria said firmly. I'm staying here, teaching and running the foundation, the way Mom would have wanted, the way I want to. And if I oppose this, Richard challenged. Victoria straightened. Then I'll take it to the press. I'm sure they'd be very interested in how Hamilton Industries has been mismanaging its charitable foundation. But I don't want that, Father. I want us to work together to make this foundation something we can both be proud of. The tension in the room was palpable as father and daughter locked eyes. To everyone's surprise, it was Marcus who broke the silence. Sir, he said, addressing Richard, I've worked for you for 7 years. In that time, I've never seen anyone show the kind of leadership and vision that Miss Hamilton has demonstrated these past weeks. She's not running from responsibility. She's embracing it in her own way. Richard looked around the room, at the faces of those his wife had helped, at the board members who were nodding in agreement with Marcus, and finally at his daughter, standing tall and confident in a way he'd never seen before. You'll need to revise the funding allocation, he said finally, and I expect weekly updates on the implementation. Victoria felt her heart soar, but kept her professional composure. Of course, Father, I'll have the revised numbers to you tomorrow. As the board members filed out, many stopping to congratulate her, Victoria felt a presence at her side. Lucy had slipped into the room during the presentation and now stood close, their shoulders barely touching. I'm proud of you, Lucy whispered. Victoria turned to her, suddenly not caring who saw. I couldn't have done it without you, any of it. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Victoria realized that she hadn't just found her purpose. She'd found her person. The way forward wouldn't be easy, but with Lucy beside her, she was ready to face whatever came next. What she didn't know was that the biggest challenge and the most important decision still lay ahead. 6 months after the board meeting that changed everything, Victoria stood in her mother's old office at the foundation, now her office, surrounded by photographs. They weren't the formal portraits and corporate awards that had once dominated the space, but candid shots of children learning, teachers teaching, and communities growing. Among them was a new favorite, a picture of her mother reading to a younger Lucy, both absorbed in the story, unaware of the camera. Victoria was putting the final touches on the expanded education program's launch when Lucy burst into the office, her face flushed with excitement. Sarah got into the gifted program, Lucy exclaimed, referring to one of their struggling students. Her mom just called. The tutoring sessions worked. Victoria's face lit up. She'd spent countless extra hours working with Sarah, determined to help the bright but underserved child reach her full potential. That's wonderful. We should celebrate with... She was cut off by Lucy crossing the room in 3 quick strides and kissing her. It wasn't their first kiss. That had happened late one evening 2 months ago, after a particularly challenging but rewarding day in the classroom. But this kiss held something new. Pride, joy, and complete certainty. When they separated, Lucy's eyes were shining. I love watching you with the children. You've found your calling, Victoria. You know that, right? Victoria smiled, touching her mother's necklace. I think I finally do. Though I have to admit, teaching was easier before the promotion. She gestured to the stack of papers on her desk. Budgets, proposals and plans for expanding the education program to 5 new locations across the city. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change. Victoria split her time between teaching and running the foundation, determined to maintain her connection to the classroom, even as she took on greater administrative responsibilities. Her father, to everyone's surprise, had become cautiously supportive after seeing the positive press and community response to Victoria's changes. He'd even visited the classroom once, standing awkwardly in the doorway as Victoria led a science lesson. She'd caught him smiling when a little boy proudly showed off his project. Speaking of the expansion, Lucy said, her expression growing serious, have you thought more about my proposal? Victoria's hand instinctively went to the drawer where she kept Lucy's detailed plan for a teacher training program. It was brilliant, a way to prepare more educators like Lucy, who understood both the challenges and the potential of their students. I have, Victoria replied, and I think it's exactly what we need. But, she hesitated, it would mean changes for us. You'd be running the program, which means no more sharing a classroom. Lucy took Victoria's hands in hers. Change isn't always bad. Look at how much has changed already. She gestured around the office, at the pictures of their students, at the woman Victoria had become. Besides, we'll still have this. She squeezed Victoria's hands meaningfully, and Victoria felt that familiar warmth spread through her chest. Their relationship had evolved naturally, growing stronger as they worked side by side. The Foundation's board had been surprisingly accepting, perhaps because Victoria's success in revitalizing the programs had earned her the right to live life on her own terms. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Marcus entered, carrying more files, but he smiled knowingly at their joined hands. "The vinyl numbers for the expansion," he said, setting down the folders. "And your father would like to know if you're both still coming to dinner on Sunday." Victoria felt Lucy's hand tighten in hers. Sunday dinner had become a monthly tradition, though the first one had been painfully awkward. Gradually, Richard Hamilton had begun to see in Lucy what Victoria saw: her intelligence, her dedication, her unwavering commitment to their shared mission. "Tell him we'll be there," Victoria said. "And Marcus, thank you for everything." After he left, Victoria turned back to Lucy. "You know, I've been thinking about something else too." She moved to her desk and pulled out another document, a deed to a property in the neighborhood where they worked. "The Foundation owns this building. It's small, but with some renovation." Lucy's eyes widened as she looked at the plans Victoria had drawn up. "A new early education center?" "Not just that," Victoria said softly. "I want to name it after my mother, but with a focus on your training program, a place where we can prepare the next generation of teachers while serving the community, where both our dreams can grow together." Lucy stared at the plans, tears forming in her eyes. "Victoria, I know it's ambitious," Victoria continued, suddenly nervous, "but I thought this time it was Lucy who cut her off with a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. "It's perfect," Lucy whispered against her lips. "Just like you." Victoria laughed softly. "I'm far from perfect, but I'm finally who I'm supposed to be." Later that afternoon, they visited their classroom together. The children were gone for the day, but their presence lingered in the artwork on the walls, the books left open on tables, the tiny chairs pushed askew. Victoria wrapped her arms around Lucy from behind, resting her chin on her shoulder. "I used to think success meant following my father's path. Now I know it means having the courage to follow your heart." Lucy turned in her arms, smiling. "Your mother would be proud of you, not just for saving her programs, but for finding your own way." "Our way," Victoria corrected, pulling Lucy closer. "After all, none of this would have happened if you hadn't challenged me that first day." As the late afternoon sun filtered through the classroom windows, casting a warm glow over the space that had changed both their lives, Victoria felt a deep sense of peace. She had found her true calling, not in corporate boardrooms or law offices, but in a basement classroom where children's dreams took flight. More than that, she had found love in the most unexpected place, with a passionate teacher who had shown her what it meant to live authentically. The next morning, Victoria would return to this classroom to teach, then head upstairs to her office to shape the Foundation's future. She would continue to balance both worlds, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Her father would eventually come to understand that she had inherited the best of both her parents, his drive and her mother's heart. But for now, in this quiet moment with Lucy, Victoria was exactly where she belonged. She had learned that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't following the path others set for you, but having the strength to forge your own. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone to walk that path beside you. They left the classroom hand in hand, stepping into the future they would build together. A future where dreams were nurtured, potential was unleashed, and love grew in the most unexpected gardens of hope. What would you do if you had to choose between meeting others' expectations and following your heart? Has someone ever changed your life by believing in you when no one else did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story could inspire others who are facing similar crossroads in their lives. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support keeps our channel going, allowing us to bring you powerful, emotional stories every day that remind us of what truly matters in life. And if you enjoyed the emotional journey of finding one's true purpose, you won't want to miss the incredible story waiting for you on the left. Trust me, it's another powerful reminder that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we least expect them. Remember, by subscribing, you're not just supporting our channel, you're joining a community that believes in the power of real, authentic stories that touch hearts and change lives. See you in our next video.